My name is Alex Quimby, and I'm going to be presenting on the educational philosopher Erik Erikson. Erik Erikson was born in Germany to a single mother. This stemmed a lot of what his identity crisis came from. Not until he was about 5 years old was he adopted by his stepfather, who was a Jewish man, while Erik Erikson was a very Dutch-looking child. He had blonde hair and blue eyes. While in school, he felt a lot of times he was made fun of when he was with his German friends because he was Jewish, and was oftentimes made fun of with his Jewish friends because of how he looked. So his early life brought on a lot of his issues in older life. As Erik Erikson grew up, he studied art. He wanted to be an artist selling art until he realized that he couldn't make a living this way, so he went into teaching, where he became fascinated with things like Montessori education and the teachings of Sigmund Freud and that psychological aspect of education. So as Erik Erikson continued to study education, he began to think about this identity crisis that students undergo and how one's identity affects their ability to learn and to be an educated person. So some of his main thoughts on education. He was very concerned with this connection between your individual and the society, and how you develop as a person, and how you determine who you are and what's valuable to you, and also how others perceive you. This causes an identity crisis for all people, and many people say he coined this term, identity crisis. How do people perceive me, and how do I perceive myself? And in Erik Erikson's opinion, that was the foundation of education, was how one perceives himself and how one believes others perceive them. So as he was looking at this educational aspect, he found that children undergo these stages of development. And in each stage, the child learns different things about who they want to become, how they want to become this person, and how they can implement these changes in their life. So his thoughts on education were that through these different stages, children are deciding who they want to become, who they want to identify as. And then each kid is wrestling with these new ideas, and then due to these changes that happen, children need a place that's going to be playful for them, that's going to be careful for them, and an environment that's free for them to learn, to make decisions, to decide, is this who I want to be, or is this not how I want to be perceived? So those were his thoughts on education, that we go through these stages, and that in each stage, you're deciding what your needs as a learner are, and how you can achieve those needs. Through his thoughts on education, he had a lot of impacts on modern education today. Some of the biggest ones do align with Montessori education, which we see is still very large in America today. Some of his big things come from this idea of training the social and emotional aspect of the child, which especially today in public education where I work, we see how big that is. That you don't just focus on the learner as an academic, but as an emotional and a social being, and how we can train teachers to help students as emotional and social beings. Similar, he encourages teachers, one of his biggest impacts on education is encouraging teachers to be acutely aware of themselves before they can teach their students. I know for myself, a lot of trainings that I've been to talk about how we have to be aware of ourselves, how teachers have to think about themselves before they can even think about teaching a child. And I think a lot of that stems from Erik Erikson's idea of these stages and these developmental crises that human beings go through. Erikson also has an impact in challenging teachers to teach in humanitarian ways. Don't just do this, do that, be a robot and do as I say, but how can we nurture children? How can we help them, again, establish that social and emotional aspect of themselves? So these are some of the ideas and impacts of Erik Erikson, which many agree with and many don't. Some of the common critics of Erikson believe that he saw all children to develop in a similar way and didn't take into account life experiences that could alter the identity of a child, which I would agree with. I think it's important to see every single student as an individual learner rather than we must treat them all this way. They all develop in the same exact way. Whereas one significant life incident or crisis can completely change someone's identity, can completely change how they view themselves and how they want others to view them. So many of the critics of Erikson say that he doesn't account for this in his educational philosophies, which I would agree with. But for the most part, I do believe Erikson had a good idea of the human being and how we can best educate people as social and emotional and academic learners, and that we must focus on all three aspects of the learner.